Among the ashes of dreams, some souls learn to bloom, in the hollow spaces between heartbeats, where silence tastes of smoke and loss. Riven Hale searches through rubble that was once home. Her fingers, calloused from a life of surviving rather than living, sift through memories made manifest. A charred wooden spoon that once stirred her mother's healing broths, fragments of pottery that held water when hope still flowed freely, the scattered bones of a village that dared to believe in tomorrow. She is 21 and ancient, a girl aged by abandonment, who moves through the ruins like a ghost haunting her own existence. The wolves who once called themselves her pack had made their verdict clear long before the raiders came. She was burden, not blessing, too weak to hunt, too broken to heal, too empty to bear the children that might have justified her place among the strong. Now, in this graveyard of all she had ever known, Riven understands the cruel mathematics of survival. The dead cannot disappoint, the lost cannot be abandoned again, and a heart that has already shattered cannot break further, or so she tells herself as she digs through debris, searching for anything that might keep her breathing for one more day. But beneath the ash and bitter acceptance, something stirs, something that recognizes the sound of another's pain, even when her own threatens to drown out the world. Something that, despite every lesson life has taught her about the cost of caring, still believes that mercy is a choice worth making. In a world where strength is measured by claws and fangs, where power speaks only in growls and submission, Riven Hale is about to discover that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest act of refusing to let another suffer alone, even when that choice changes everything, even when it calls to her the most dangerous predator in all the Northern Territories, even when it awakens something within her that she never knew existed, and captures the attention of a king who has forgotten how to want anything beyond duty and dominance. The ashes are still warm beneath her feet. The story is just beginning. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to everything. The crumbling stone walls, the charred wooden beams scattered like broken bones across what had once been the village square. Even Riven's own hair that she kept tucked beneath her patched hood. 3 days had passed since the attack, and the ash continued to fall like gray snow, settling into the cracks of her worn boots as she picked her way through the ruins of her former home. Another dead end, she thought bitterly, stepping over the collapsed doorframe of what had been the baker's shop. The raiders had been thorough. Not a single loaf remained, not even crumbs. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a constant companion since the destruction, but Riven had learned to ignore such discomforts long before fire and bloodshed had claimed Thornwick Village. Being the daughter of the pack's Omega healer had never afforded her luxuries. When her mother died of fever 2 winters past, and her father followed her into the earth barely 6 months later, Riven had become nothing more than dead weight to a pack already struggling to survive. The other wolves had made their feelings clear. She was too weak to hunt, too timid to fight, and too poor to contribute anything of value. Useless girl, they'd called her. Burden. And perhaps they'd been right. Now, crouching beside the skeleton of a merchant's stall, Riven wrapped her fingers around a dented metal cup, the first useful thing she'd found all morning. It wasn't much, but it could hold water. If I can find any clean water, she amended silently, tucking the cup into her makeshift satchel alongside the handful of singed herbs she'd managed to salvage from her family's garden. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of something that made her freeze completely. A whimper, soft, barely audible above the whisper of ash falling, but distinctly alive, distinctly young. Riven's heart lurched. She'd spent days searching the rubble for survivors, calling out until her voice went hoarse, but finding only silence and sorrow. The raiders had taken everyone, the strong as slaves, the weak as sport. She'd hidden in the root cellar beneath her family's cottage, trembling in the dark while footsteps thundered overhead and screams pierced the night. When dawn finally came, she'd emerged to find herself the sole survivor of her entire pack. The whimper came again, weaker this time, from beneath a massive oak beam that had fallen across the remains of the pack house. It's probably just the wind, Riven told herself, but her feet were already carrying her toward the sound. Don't get your hopes up. Don't. Her breath caught in her throat. There, trapped beneath a pocket of debris but somehow miraculously uncrucked, lay the smallest pup she'd ever seen. Its fur was the color of fresh snow touched with silver at the tips, and it couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. One tiny paw was bent at an unnatural angle, and a thin line of dried blood traced from its ear to its throat. By all rights, it should have been dead. But it wasn't. The pup's eyes, startlingly blue, like winter sky, fixed on her face with an intensity that seemed impossible for something so young. When their gazes met, it released another soft cry, and something deep in Riven's chest cracked open. "This is dangerous," warned the practical voice in her head, the one that had kept her alive through hunger and abandonment, and 3 days of scavenging through ruins. Pups don't survive alone. Where there's a pup, there are parents. Where there are parents looking for their young. But the rational thoughts faded into nothing when the little creature attempted to crawl toward her, dragging its injured leg and mewling with such pitiful determination that tears pricked at the corners of Riven's eyes. Before she could second-guess herself, she was on her knees, carefully shifting aside the smaller pieces of debris until she could reach the pup. It weighed almost nothing in her hands, its body trembling with cold and pain, but it pressed against her chest immediately, seeking warmth. "Shh," Riven whispered, though her voice shook almost as badly as the creature in her arms. "You're safe now. I've got you." The pup's breathing was labored, and she could feel its ribs too clearly beneath the soft fur. It needed food, warmth, and proper care for its injuries, none of which she could provide. The smart thing would be to leave it where she'd found it, to walk away before whoever was looking for it discovered her scent all over their young. Instead, Riven unwound the threadbare scarf from around her neck and wrapped it carefully around the pup's small form. The blue eyes watched her with what seemed like gratitude, and when she tucked the bundle against her chest beneath her cloak, the little body relaxed with a sigh that sounded almost human in its relief. "Just until you're strong enough," she murmured, though even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Already she could feel something fierce and protective blooming in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since her parents' deaths. This tiny, helpless creature needed her. For the first time in years, Riven was genuinely important to someone. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when she finally made her way to the old shepherd's hut she'd chosen as temporary shelter. Hidden in the hills above the village ruins, it had escaped the raiders' notice, offering her a place to rest between her daily searches for salvageable supplies. The pup had slept against her chest for most of the afternoon, its breathing gradually growing steadier and stronger. Inside the hut, Riven built a small fire in the ancient hearth and arranged the few possessions she'd managed to gather. The metal cup, a sharp stone that might serve as a knife, a pouch of medicinal herbs, and now one impossibly precious bundle of snow-white fur. She'd managed to coax a few drops of water past the pup's lips, and had even mashed some edible roots into a paste soft enough for it to swallow. Color was returning to the pink inner skin of its ears, and it had stopped shivering constantly. Whatever bloodline it came from, it was strong, perhaps too strong for its own good. As darkness fell beyond the hut's single window, and strange unease began to creep up Riven's spine, the forest, which had been filled with the normal sounds of evening, insects chirping, small creatures rustling through undergrowth, was becoming unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. The pup stirred against her chest, releasing a soft whine that held notes of distress. "What is it, little one?" Riven whispered, stroking the silky fur between its ears. "Do you hear something?" That was when she felt it, a presence so vast and commanding that it seemed to press against the very walls of the little hut. The sensation was followed immediately by the sound that would haunt her dreams forever after, a howl that started low and built to a crescendo of pure, primal authority. It was answered by another howl, then another, until the entire forest rang with the voices of dozens of wolves, the hunting call of an alpha, a powerful alpha. Terror flooded Riven's veins like ice water. She knew, with the certainty of prey recognizing a predator, that they had come for the pup. Whoever had lost this precious child had brought an entire pack to find it, and they would show no mercy to the human girl who had dared to touch what belonged to them. The howls grew closer, converging on her location with military precision. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. In minutes, perhaps less, they would surround the hut completely. The pup in her arms began to respond to the calls, its own small voice adding to the chorus in pitiful yips that tugged at Riven's heart. It knew its family was coming. It wanted to go home. Let it go. her mind screamed. Put it outside and maybe they'll take it and leave you alone. But when she looked down at the tiny creature, so trusting and vulnerable in her arms, Riven knew she couldn't do it. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't abandon something that had depended on her, even if it cost her everything. The footsteps began, dozens of them, circling the hut in perfect formation. No voices, no commands, just the whisper of paws against earth and the rasp of claws against stone. They moved with the discipline of soldiers, the coordination of apex predators who had hunted together for years. Then, suddenly, silence. Riven held her breath, clutching the pup against her chest while her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they could hear it through the walls. Seconds stretched into eternity. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, the only sound in a world that had become utterly still. The door exploded inward. Splinters of ancient wood scattered across the floor like shattered bones as the doorframe gave way under impossible force. Riven pressed herself against the far wall of the hut, clutching the pup so tightly against her chest that she feared she might hurt it, but unable to loosen her grip even as terror threatened to stop her heart entirely. The figure that filled the doorway was not fully human, not fully wolf, but something caught between the two states in a way that spoke of barely contained power. Tall beyond what should have been possible, with broad shoulders that blocked out the starlight behind him, he wore the rough traveling clothes of a warrior, but they could not hide the predatory grace with which he moved. His hair was dark as midnight, swept back from a face carved from granite and shadow, all sharp angles and harder edges. But it was his eyes that stole Riven's breath, golden like molten amber, ancient and wild and utterly, completely focused on her. More specifically, focused on the bundle of white fur she held protectively against her heart. Behind him, other figures began to materialize from the darkness. Wolves in their true forms. Massive creatures whose shoulders reached past Riven's waist, their eyes reflecting the firelight like scattered gems. The scent of alpha power rolled off all of them in waves so thick she could taste it on her tongue. But it was nothing compared to the aura emanating from the man in the doorway. Alpha King. The knowledge hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had never seen him before, but there was no mistaking what he was. The raw dominance that pressed against her skin like a living thing. The way even his own wolves held themselves in perfect submission around him. The terrible beauty of his face that seemed too perfect to be entirely human. This was the ruler of the Northern Territories, the wolf whose very name was whispered in fear across a dozen kingdoms, and she had stolen his child. The pup in her arms began to whimper, its small voice calling out in recognition of its father. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the Alpha King motionless, and he stepped into the hut with the fluid, predatory movement of a born killer. Each footfall made the ancient floorboards groan in protest, and Riven could feel the vibration through the soles of her feet. "You have something that belongs to me," he said, and his voice was like distant thunder, low and rumbling and carrying the promise of storms to come. It was neither cruel nor kind, but held absolute authority that made Riven's wolf, buried deep though it was, want to bare her throat in immediate submission. She tried to speak, tried to explain that she had only been trying to help, that she meant no harm, but her voice had deserted her completely. All she could do was stare up at him as he approached, fighting the instinct to curl into a ball and hope he might show mercy to something too small and weak to be worth his attention. The Alpha King stopped just beyond arm's reach, his golden gaze moving from her face to the bundle she held, then back again. "You smell of fear," he observed, and there was something almost puzzled in his tone. "Yet you do not release him." Somehow, that simple statement gave Riven back her voice. "He was hurt," she whispered, the words scraping against her dry throat, trapped under the rubble. I couldn't just leave him there." One dark eyebrow rose slightly, the only change in his otherwise impassive expression. "You risked your life for a stranger's child." It was not a question, but Riven nodded anyway. The pup had grown heavier in her arms, or perhaps her strength was finally giving out under the weight of fear and exhaustion. Either way, she found herself sinking slowly to her knees, still holding the small bundle against her chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "I gave him water," she said, though she had no idea why she felt the need to explain herself to this terrifying creature. "And some food. His leg was broken, but I think it's healing. He's strong." The Alpha King's eyes never left her face as she spoke, and she found herself trapped by their intensity, unable to look away, even though every instinct screamed that meeting his gaze directly was an act of suicidal defiance. "You know who I am," he said, and again it was not a question. "Yes," Riven breathed. "You are Arik Voss, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and yet you do not beg for mercy. You do not offer excuses or attempt to flee." His head tilted slightly to one side, a gesture that was purely lupine despite his human form. Why? The honest answer was that she was too terrified to move, too overwhelmed by his presence to think clearly enough for self-preservation. But looking down at the pup nestled against her chest, feeling its small body warm and alive and dependent on her protection, Riven found a deeper truth. "Because he needs me," she said simply, "and I won't abandon something that needs me. Not even for you." Silence stretched between them like a held breath. Around the edges of the hut, she could sense the other wolves growing restless, their attention focused on their king as they waited for his command. One word from him, and they would tear her apart without hesitation. One gesture, and her life would end as quickly and brutally as her village had been destroyed. Instead, Alpha King Arik stepped closer. This near, she could see details that distance had hidden, the fine scars that traced across his knuckles, speaking of countless battles, the way his clothes, though well-made, showed signs of hard travel, the exhaustion that lurked in the depths of his golden eyes, as though he had been searching without rest for days. "His name is Kai," the Alpha King said quietly. "He is my son, my only son." The words hit Riven like physical blows. Not just any pup, but the heir to the Northern Territories, the future king of the most powerful pack in the known world. And she, a worthless Omega with no family and no allies, had been feeding him mashed roots and giving him water from a dented cup. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and meant it more deeply than she had ever meant anything in her life. "I didn't know. I would never have presumed to—" "You would never have presumed to save his life?" There was something strange in the Alpha King's voice now, an undercurrent she could not identify. "To show kindness to a creature that could give you nothing in return?" Riven looked down at the pup, at Kai, and felt her heart clench with unexpected grief. Soon, she would have to give him back. Soon, she would be alone again, with nothing but empty hills and bitter memories for company. "It wasn't about what he could give me," she said softly. "He was just so small, so hurt. I couldn't bear to see him suffer." The Alpha King knelt down suddenly, bringing himself to her eye level, and the movement was so unexpected that Riven actually gasped. This close, she could smell his scent, pine and mountain air, and something wild and dangerous that made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Look at me," he commanded, and though his voice was softer now, it still carried the weight of absolute authority. Riven lifted her gaze reluctantly, expecting to see anger or disgust or contempt. What she saw instead was confusion, as though she had presented him with a puzzle he could not solve. "What is your name?" he asked. "Riven Hale," she answered automatically. Of Thornwick Village." Something flickered across his features at the mention of her destroyed home. "You are the survivor, the only one," she confirmed, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Everyone else was killed or taken. And yet you stayed. You remained in territory that had been marked by raiders, alone and unprotected, instead of seeking sanctuary with another pack." Riven almost smiled at that, though there was no humor in it. "What pack would take me? I'm nobody. Just the dead healer's daughter with no wolf to speak of and no value to offer." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed slightly. No wolf. Heat flooded Riven's cheeks as she realized what she had admitted. In a world where strength was everything, where the ability to shift meant the difference between being treated as a person or property, confessing her weakness to the most powerful alpha alive was tantamount to signing her own death warrant. "I can sense her," she said quickly, desperate to explain. "My wolf. She's just buried deep, dormant. The pack healers said it sometimes happens with trauma, but that it might return in time if—" "Peace," the Alpha King said, and his voice held a gentleness that was more shocking than any display of violence could have been. "I am not your enemy, Riven Hale." The sound of her name in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Then what are you?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. For a long moment, he simply studied her face, his golden eyes searching for something she could not name. The pup stirred between them, letting out a small yawn that was so perfectly normal and innocent that it seemed to break some of the tension in the air. "I am a king who has been searching for his lost child for 3 days without rest," Arik said finally. "I am a father who believed he had lost everything that mattered. And I am a man who has just discovered that there are still people in this world capable of true selflessness." His hand moved slowly, telegraphing the gesture clearly so as not to startle her, and came to rest gently on the bundle of white fur. Kai immediately pressed into his father's touch, releasing a contented rumble that was part purr, part growl. "He knows you," Riven observed, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "As I know him." There was infinite tenderness in the way Arik's fingers stroked his son's small head. "When the attack came, he was sleeping in the nursery. My warriors fought bravely, but we were outnumbered. In the chaos, someone took him. By the time we drove back the raiders, both Kai and his kidnapper were gone." Riven's breath caught as she began to understand. "The raiders brought him to my village, and when they were finished destroying it, they left him for dead beneath the rubble." Arik's voice had gone cold again, promising terrible retribution for those responsible. "If you had not found him, if you had not cared for him." He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. Riven had seen what the cold night air could do to creatures left exposed. Even a prince among wolves was not immune to death by exposure. "I would do it again," she said, surprised by her own certainty. "Even knowing who he was, who you are, I would do it again." The Alpha King's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, Riven felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe you would." He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion, and Riven felt the loss of his nearness like a physical ache. Around them, the other wolves had remained perfectly still throughout the entire exchange, but now they began to shift restlessly, clearly eager to return to their king's stronghold. "What happens now?" Riven asked, though she dreaded the answer. She would give Kai back, of course. She had always known this moment would come, but the thought of returning to her empty existence, of losing the only purpose she had found since her world fell apart, was almost unbearable. The Alpha King looked down at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his words were the last thing she expected to hear. "Now, you come with me." Riven's mind went completely blank. What? "You come with me," Arik repeated, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "To my stronghold, as my guest." "I don't understand." Riven struggled to her feet, still clutching Kai against her chest. "Why would you want me there? I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer a king." "You saved my son's life," Arik said simply. "That places you under my protection for as long as you wish it. And you—" He paused, studying her with those unsettling golden eyes. "You interest me, Rivenhale. It has been a very long time since anyone has done that." Before she could respond, before she could even begin to process what he was saying, the Alpha King turned toward his waiting wolves. "We leave for home," he commanded, and immediately the pack began to move, flowing out of the hut like water seeking its level. Arik looked back at her over his shoulder, and something in his expression made her heart skip a beat. "Unless you prefer to remain here alone, living on roots and rainwater while you wait for the next group of raiders to find you." It was not really a choice, and they both knew it. Riven had no home to return to, no family to protect her, no future beyond bare survival. And yet, as she looked into the Alpha King's eyes, she had the strangest feeling that he would have honored her decision if she chose to stay. "I'll need to gather my things," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "You have 1 minute," Arik replied, but there was something that might have been approval in his tone. Riven moved quickly, stuffing her few possessions into her battered satchel. The cup, the herbs, the sharp stone, a change of clothes that was more patches than original fabric. Everything she owned in the world fit easily into one small bag. When she emerged from the hut, she found the Alpha King waiting beside a massive black horse, its eyes glowing with an intelligence that spoke of supernatural breeding. The other wolves had already departed, leaving only their scent lingering in the cold night air. "Can you ride?" Arik asked. Riven nodded, though it had been years since she had been on horseback. The Alpha King mounted in a single graceful motion, then extended his hand to help her up behind him. The moment her fingers touched his, she felt a shock of something, warmth, recognition, connection, that made her gasp. If Arik noticed her reaction, he gave no sign of it. "Hold tight," he said, as she settled behind him on the horse's broad back, Kai still nestled safely in her arms. "And do not be afraid. You are under my protection now, and no harm will come to you while you remain so." As they rode out into the darkness, leaving the ruins of her old life behind, Riven could not shake the feeling that everything was about to change in ways she could not even imagine. The Alpha King's words echoed in her mind. "You interest me." What could a creature of such power and majesty possibly find interesting about someone like her? And why did the thought of discovering the answer fill her with equal parts terror and anticipation? Behind them, the shepherd's hut disappeared into shadow, and ahead lay the unknown lands of the Northern Territories, where wolves ruled and legends walked among mortals. Riven closed her eyes and held Kai closer, trying to convince herself that this was all just another dream. But the solid warmth of the Alpha King's back against her chest, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm, were far too real to dismiss as fantasy. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The journey to the Northern Territories took them through landscapes that seemed carved from dreams and nightmares in equal measure. For the first hour, they rode through forests so dense that the canopy above blocked out all starlight, leaving them traveling through a world of absolute darkness, broken only by the supernatural glow of the horse's eyes and the occasional flash of golden light from wolves that ran alongside them, invisible guardians keeping pace through the undergrowth. Riven had never ventured beyond the borders of her own territory before. The furthest she had ever traveled from Thornwick Village was to the neighboring settlement of Millhaven, a half-day's walk through familiar meadows and well-worn paths. This wild country, with its towering trees and hidden dangers, felt like stepping into one of the old tales her mother used to whisper to her before sleep, stories of ancient magic and creatures that walked the line between blessing and curse. The Alpha King had not spoken since they began riding, but Riven was intensely aware of his presence. The solid strength of his back pressed against her chest, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he guided their mount with subtle shifts of his weight, the clean scent of pine and winter air that clung to his dark hair. She had never been this close to a man before, certainly never to one who radiated such raw, dangerous power, and she found herself fighting the strangest urge to press her face against his shoulder and simply breathe him in. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "He is a king, and you are nothing. Whatever kindness he has shown you is born of gratitude, nothing more." But even as she tried to convince herself that her reaction was merely the result of relief and exhaustion, she could not ignore the way her heart raced whenever he turned his head slightly, or the electric shock that ran through her each time his hand accidentally brushed against hers as they rode. Kai had fallen asleep against her chest sometime during the second hour, his small body warm and trusting in her arms. Occasionally he would stir and make soft noises, tiny growls and whimpers that spoke of dreams filled with running and hunting and all the things a future king would need to learn. Each sound tugged at something deep in Riven's chest, a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. As they crested a particularly steep hill, the Alpha King finally brought their horse to a halt. "We rest here," he said, his voice cutting through the silence that had stretched between them like a living thing. The grove he had chosen was protected on 3 sides by massive oak trees, their ancient trunks scarred by time and weather, but still standing strong against whatever storms might come. A small stream wandered through the center of the clearing, its water black as ink under the star-filled sky, and the grass beneath the trees was soft enough to provide comfortable bedding. Arik dismounted first, then turned to help Riven down from the horse. The moment his hands closed around her waist, lifting her easily from the saddle, Riven felt that same shock of connection she had experienced earlier, only stronger this time. His touch seemed to burn through the thin fabric of her dress, leaving her skin tingling long after he had set her safely on the ground. "Thank you," she murmured, not daring to meet his eyes as she stepped away from him, still cradling Kai against her chest. "We have perhaps 4 hours until dawn," Arik said, moving to unsaddle the horse with practiced efficiency. "You should rest while you can. Tomorrow will bring us to my stronghold, and you will need your strength for what awaits there." The word sent a chill down Riven's spine. What awaits there? Arik paused in his work, his hands still on the horse's bridle, and for a moment, his expression was unreadable. "Questions," he said finally. "Many questions, from many people who will want to understand how the future king of the Northern Territories came to be found by a lone Omega in the ruins of a destroyed village." "Will they believe that I meant no harm?" Riven asked, and hated the way her voice shook slightly on the words. The Alpha King's golden gaze found hers across the small clearing, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been sympathy. Some will, others. He shrugged, the gesture somehow managing to convey both regret and inevitability. Others will see only a human girl who somehow gained possession of something precious to their king, and they will wonder what she might want in return for giving it back. The implications of his words hit Riven like a physical blow. They will think I took him deliberately, that I am trying to use him for some purpose. Some may think that, yes. Arik finished with the horse and moved to gather wood for a fire, his movements sharp and efficient. It is the nature of court politics. Everyone has an agenda, everyone wants something, and genuine kindness is so rare that it is often mistaken for manipulation. Riven sank down onto a fallen log near the stream, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had gotten herself into. She had thought saving Kai would be the hard part, but now she realized that the truly difficult challenges were yet to come. "Perhaps I should not go with you after all," she said quietly. "If my presence will cause problems." No, the word was sharp, cutting, and carried enough alpha command to make Riven's spine straighten involuntarily. Eric had gone completely still in the process of arranging kindling, and when he looked at her, his eyes had taken on an almost feral glow. "You will not return to that wasteland alone, Rivenhale. I have claimed you as my guest, and under pack law, that makes you mine to protect. Anyone who wishes to question that arrangement will have to go through me first." The possessive note in his voice sent heat racing through Riven's veins in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I do not wish to be a burden to you," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You are not a burden." Arik struck flint against steel, and sparks caught in the dry wood, sending orange light dancing across his features. "You are a mystery, and I find myself curious about mysteries." "There is nothing mysterious about me," Riven protested. "I am exactly what I appear to be, a poor orphan with no family, no prospects, and no particular talents worth noting." The Alpha King's laugh was low and rich and sent shivers down her spine for reasons she did not want to examine too closely. "If that were true, then why does my son calm whenever you hold him? Why does your scent carry notes of power that should not exist in someone whose wolf is dormant? And why—" He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through to her soul. "Why do I find myself reluctant to let you out of my sight?" Riven's breath caught in her throat. "I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Arik rose from the fire and crossed the small clearing with the fluid, predatory grace that marked him as a born apex predator. When he knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level, Riven had to fight the urge to shrink back against the log. This close, she could see the flecks of green and gold that made up his extraordinary eyes, could count each individual dark lash, could feel the heat radiating from his body in waves that made her own skin burn in response. "You saved my son's life," he said, his voice low and rough and intimate in a way that made her pulse race. "That alone would be enough to earn my protection and gratitude. But there is something else, something that calls to me whenever I look at you. Something that makes my wolf restless and hungry in ways I have not felt for many years." "Your wolf?" Riven whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "My wolf," Arik confirmed, and now his scent was growing stronger, filling her senses with pine and mountain air, and something wild and dangerous that made her mouth water despite herself. "He wants to claim you, Rivenhale, to mark you as mine, and ensure that no other male ever has the right to touch you, and I find myself increasingly inclined to let him have what he wants." The words hit Riven like lightning, sending shockwaves through her entire body. She had heard of such things, of course. The legends spoke of instant connections between alphas and their chosen mates, of bonds that formed in moments and lasted for lifetimes. But such stories were for other people, people with noble bloodlines and powerful gifts, not for broken Omega girls who could barely access their own wolves. "I think you are mistaken," she said, though her voice shook so badly that even she did not believe the words. "I am not, that is, I could not be. Someone like you would never—" "Someone like me?" Arik's hand rose slowly, telegraphing the movement so clearly that she had time to pull away if she wished. When she remained frozen in place, he cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing across the sharp line of her cheekbone. "Someone powerful? Someone feared? Someone who has spent so many years focused on duty and responsibility, that he had forgotten what it felt like to want something purely for himself. Riven's eyes fluttered closed at his touch, her head tilting involuntarily into his palm, like a flower turning toward sunlight. She had never been touched with such tenderness before, had never experienced the strange alchemy that seemed to occur whenever his skin met hers. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I," Arik admitted, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "But I know that when I thought I had lost Kai forever, when I believed my bloodline would die with me, you were the one who proved me wrong. I know that you risked everything to save someone you had never met, expecting nothing in return. And I know that every instinct I possess is telling me to keep you close, to learn everything there is to know about you, to discover what it is about Riven Hale that has managed to fascinate the Wolf King of the Northern Territories." Before Riven could respond, before she could even process the enormity of what he was saying, Kai stirred in her arms and let out a soft whimper. The sound broke the spell that had fallen over them, and Arik pulled back slightly, though his hand remained cupped against her cheek. "He is hungry," the Alpha King observed, his voice still rough with suppressed emotion. "I have some mashed roots left," Riven said, grateful for the distraction even as she mourned the loss of his closeness. "And there was meat in the satchel, though I am not certain if he is old enough for solid food." "He is old enough," Arik assured her, finally letting his hand fall away from her face. "Wolf pups develop more quickly than their human counterparts, particularly those of royal blood. By the time he reaches his first birthday, he will be walking and shifting at will." Riven busied herself with preparing food for Kai, mashing the remaining roots into a soft paste and shredding small pieces of dried meat into manageable portions. The pup ate eagerly, his tiny teeth already sharp enough to handle the tougher textures, and when he was finished, he settled back against her chest with a contented sigh that made both adults smile. "He trusts you completely," Arik observed, settling back on his heels to watch them. "That is unusual. Royal wolves are bred to be suspicious of strangers, to recognize potential threats and react accordingly. The fact that he accepted you so readily suggests that his instincts recognize something about you that even you may not be aware of." Riven looked down at the pup in her arms, studying his perfect small features and the way his snow-white fur caught the firelight like spun silver. What could his instincts possibly recognize? "I am nobody special." "You keep saying that," Arik said, and there was something almost frustrated in his tone, as though repetition will make it true. "But everything about this situation suggests otherwise. The timing of your discovery of him, the way he has bonded to you, the fact that your dormant wolf has begun to stir in response to his presence." Riven's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What did you say?" "Your wolf," Arik repeated, watching her face carefully. "Surely you have felt her beginning to wake. The restlessness, the heightened senses, the way your scent has begun to shift and strengthen over the past few days." Now that he mentioned it, Riven realized that she had been experiencing those very things, though she had attributed them to stress and exhaustion rather than any kind of supernatural awakening. But thinking back over the past few days, she could remember moments when her hearing had seemed unnaturally sharp, when scents had been more vivid and complex than usual, when she had felt a strange energy thrumming beneath her skin like electricity waiting to be released. "I thought it was just," she began, then trailed off, uncertain how to finish the sentence. "Just what?" Arik prompted gently. "Fear," Riven admitted. "Everything has been so overwhelming, so different from anything I have ever experienced. I assumed my body was simply reacting to the stress of it all. Perhaps," Arik allowed, but his expression suggested he did not believe that explanation for a moment. "Or perhaps caring for Kai has awakened something in you that has been sleeping for many years. There are stories, old legends, that speak of dormant wolves being called forth by the presence of royal blood, particularly royal blood that is in need of protection." The implications of his words sent a thrill of possibility through Riven's chest, followed immediately by a crushing wave of doubt. "Even if that were true," she said carefully, "it would not change who I am. I would still be the same poor orphan with nothing to offer a king." "Would you?" Arik asked, and the quiet intensity of his voice made her look up to meet his gaze. "Or would you be the woman chosen by fate itself to save the future king of the Northern Territories? The woman whose awakening wolf recognizes the call of royal blood, the woman who has managed to capture the attention of a king who thought himself incapable of being surprised by anything?" Before Riven could respond to that extraordinary statement, a new sound reached their ears from the darkness beyond the grove, the distant howl of wolves, but not the wild, joyous songs she had heard earlier. These calls were different, urgent and warning, carrying messages that made Arik's entire body go rigid with attention. "What is it?" Riven asked, instinctively pulling Kai closer against her chest. "Scouts," Arik said grimly, rising to his feet in a single fluid motion. "They have found something." He tilted his head, listening to the complex harmonies of the howls with an intensity that spoke of years spent deciphering such communications. When the calls finally faded into silence, his expression was thunderous. "What news do they bring?" Riven whispered, though she was not certain she wanted to know the answer. "The raiders who took Kai," Arik said, his voice carrying the promise of violence and retribution. "They have been found." The fire crackled and danced between them, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across their faces, and in that moment, Riven realized with crystal clarity that her old life was truly over. Whatever happened next, whether her wolf awakened fully, whether she could find a place in the dangerous world of royal politics, whether the connection she felt with the Alpha King was real, or merely a product of her own desperate loneliness, there was no going back to the simple existence she had known before. She was no longer just Riven Hale, the poor orphan from a destroyed village. She was the woman who had saved the future king, the woman who had caught the attention of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, the woman whose destiny was about to be written in blood and starlight and the wild songs of wolves. And as terrifying as that knowledge was, she found herself looking forward to discovering what came next. The Alpha King's golden eyes met hers across the fire, and in their depths, she saw promise and possibility, and the kind of fierce protectiveness that spoke of bonds deeper than mere gratitude. "Are you ready, Riven Hale?" he asked, though she sensed the question encompassed far more than their immediate journey. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I am willing to find out." Arik's smile was sharp and beautiful and dangerous, like a blade forged from starlight. "That," he said, "is exactly what I was hoping to hear." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the massive windows of the royal chambers, casting golden patterns across the polished marble floors of Shadowmere Fortress. Riven stood at the balcony overlooking the training grounds, watching as young wolves practiced their shifting forms under the watchful eyes of their instructors. The sight still filled her with wonder, dozens of children moving fluidly between human and wolf shapes, their laughter echoing off the ancient stone walls as they played and learned. 6 months ago, she could never have imagined standing here, wearing silk the color of winter morning, her hair adorned with silver pins that marked her as the Alpha King's chosen mate. The transformation had been as dramatic as it was unexpected, though not without its challenges. "Mama Riven! Mama Riven!" The delighted shriek drew her attention downward, where a considerably larger Kai was racing across the courtyard on unsteady legs, his snow-white fur gleaming in the sunlight. At 8 months old, he had grown into a beautiful pup, with his father's golden eyes and an adventurous spirit that kept his caretakers constantly on their toes. He could shift at will now, though he still preferred his wolf form for playing and exploring. Behind him, trying valiantly to keep pace, ran 3 other royal pups. His newly adopted siblings from the orphanage Riven had convinced Arik to establish for children displaced by the border wars. The sight of them together, playing without regard for bloodlines or origins, never failed to warm her heart. "Careful, little prince," called Mira, the head nursemaid, though her tone was fond rather than scolding. "Your father expects you clean for the ceremony this afternoon." The ceremony. Riven's hand moved instinctively to her throat, where a new mark had appeared just 3 days ago, the claiming bite that officially made her Arik's mate and queen of the Northern Territories. The bonding had been everything the legends promised, and more, a connection so deep and complete that she could feel Arik's presence even when he was away on royal business. "You are nervous," observed a familiar voice from behind her. Riven turned to find Arik approaching, magnificent in his formal leathers and the silver crown that marked his rank. Even after 6 months of waking up beside him, the sight of her mate still took her breath away. The dangerous beauty that had first terrified her now filled her with warmth and desire, tempered by deep affection and understanding. "A little," she admitted, moving into his embrace as naturally as breathing. "It still feels surreal, knowing that in a few hours I will be formally crowned as your queen." Arik's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Having second thoughts about accepting my proposal? Never, Riven said firmly, tilting her head back to meet his golden gaze. Though I still say you could have chosen a more traditional time and place than immediately after we finished interrogating those raiders. His laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her back. I had just watched you threaten a man twice your size with your newly awakened wolf, if he did not reveal where the other stolen children were hidden. In that moment, covered in mud and righteously furious, you were the most magnificent thing I had ever seen. I could not wait another moment to claim you properly. The memory made Riven smile. Her wolf had indeed awakened fully in the weeks following their first meeting, emerging not as the weak, dormant creature she had expected, but as something rare and powerful, a silver wolf with ice-blue eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The pack shamans called it a blessing of the moon goddess, a sign that she was destined for greatness. Riven simply called it a miracle. And now here we are, she murmured, leaning back against his strength, about to make it official before the assembled nobility of 5 kingdoms. Are you concerned about their acceptance? Arik asked, though his tone suggested he was prepared to deal with any dissent in his typically direct fashion. Some of them will always see me as the Omega girl who appeared from nowhere, Riven said honestly. But others... She gestured toward the courtyard, where several young nobles were playing happily with Kai and his adopted siblings, their parents watching with approval rather than concern. Others are beginning to understand that strength comes in many forms. It had not been an easy transition. The royal court had been initially skeptical of their king's choice of mate, questioning everything from her bloodline to her motives. But Riven had won them over gradually, using the same quiet determination that had saved Kai to prove her worth as a leader and protector. The establishment of the orphanage had been only the beginning. She had also implemented new healing programs, negotiated trade agreements with neighboring packs, and personally led rescue missions to recover kidnapped children from raiders. They respect you, Arik said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As do I. You have exceeded every expectation, challenged every assumption, and made this kingdom stronger with your presence. We make each other stronger, Riven corrected, turning in his arms to face him properly. That is what true mates do. Before Arik could respond, a small white blur came racing through the balcony doors, followed by 3 other pups and an exasperated Mira. Papa! Mama Riven! Kai launched himself at them with the fearless enthusiasm only children possessed, shifting back to his human form mid-leap, so that Arik caught a giggling toddler instead of a wolf pup. Look what I can do! The little boy held up his hands, and between his palms, a small sphere of silver light began to form, a manifestation of royal magic that should not have been possible for at least another year. Impressive, Arik said solemnly, though Riven could see the pride shining in his eyes. You have been practicing. Mama Riven taught me, Kai announced proudly. She says magic is just another way of caring for people. Your Mama Riven is very wise, Arik agreed, meeting Riven's gaze over their son's head. The love and gratitude in his expression made her heart swell with happiness. Are you ready for the big ceremony? Asked Elena, one of the other children, a serious 7-year-old whose parents had been killed in a raid 2 months prior. Will there be cake? There will definitely be cake, Riven promised, kneeling down to the girls' level. And dancing and music, and more food than any of us could eat in a week. And after the ceremony, Arik added, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for important announcements, Mama Riven will officially become your queen, which means she will have the power to make sure that all children in our territory are safe and cared for, no matter where they come from. The children cheered at this news, and even Mira smiled broadly. The promise of protection for all young ones, regardless of bloodline or circumstances, had become one of the cornerstones of Riven's platform as future queen. As the morning progressed and preparation for the coronation ceremony intensified, Riven found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a broken, abandoned girl with no future beyond bare survival. Now she was about to become the queen of the most powerful pack in the known world, mother to a prince who would one day rule justly and compassionately, and mate to an alpha who loved her with a fierceness that still took her breath away. The ceremony itself was everything she could have hoped for, and more. Representatives from dozens of packs filled the great hall of Shadowmere Fortress, their voices raised in acknowledgement as the ancient crown of silver and moonstone was placed upon her head. Kai stood proudly beside the throne, his small hand clasped in hers, while Arik spoke the ritual words that bound them not just as mates, but as the ruling pair of the Northern Territories. Queen Riven of the House of Voss, the court herald announced as the ceremony reached its crescendo, protector of the innocent, defender of the weak, beloved of the Alpha King. The cheers that rose from the assembled crowd were genuine and enthusiastic, speaking of acceptance and hope for the future. But more important to Riven than any formal recognition was the sight of Arik's face as he looked at her, filled with love and pride and absolute certainty that they would face whatever challenges came next as true partners. That evening, after the last guest had departed and the children had been tucked safely into their beds, Riven and Arik stood together on the same balcony where the day had begun. The stars shone brilliantly overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and mountain flowers through the air. "Do you ever regret it?" Arik asked quietly, his arm wrapped around her waist as they watched the moon rise over their kingdom. "Leaving behind your simple life for all of this complexity?" Riven considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the circumstances that brought us together," she said finally. "The destruction of my village, the pain Kai suffered, the children who were lost before we could save them. But regret this?" She gestured to encompass not just the magnificent fortress, but the life they had built together, their family, their purpose, their love. "Never. And if you could go back?" Arik pressed. "If you could return to Thornwick Village before the attack, live quietly as a healer's daughter, never experience any of this danger or responsibility, then I would never have met you," Riven said simply. "I would never have saved Kai, never discovered my wolf, never learned that I could be strong enough to protect others, the way I wished someone had protected me. I would have lived and died in obscurity, never knowing what I was truly capable of becoming." Arik turned her in his arms, his golden eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "And what have you become, my queen?" Riven smiled, feeling the truth of her answer resonate through every fiber of her being. "Exactly who I was always meant to be." When he kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, Riven could taste their future on his lips, filled with challenges and triumphs, sorrows and joys, but always, always faced together. She had found her mate, her purpose, and her place in the world, not through destiny or magic, but through the simple act of choosing compassion over fear. And as the moon rose higher over the Northern Territories, blessing their union and their reign, Riven knew that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be other children to save, other battles to fight, other broken hearts to heal. But whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, with courage, with love, and with the unshakable belief that even the smallest act of kindness could change the world. In the distance, wolves began to sing their ancient songs to the moon, and the sound carried on the wind like a promise of protection and prosperity for all who called the Northern Territories home. Queen Riven closed her eyes and listened, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her from the ruins of one life to the foundation of something far greater. The poor girl who had found a pup under the ruins was gone forever. In her place stood a queen, a mother, a mate, and a protector. Everything she had never dared to dream she could become, and it was exactly enough. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.